Topic here is white supremacy and the color line with the focus on Du Bois' double consciousness. At the end of this class, you need to have an understanding about these terms here. You want to use the source worksheet to complete the definition and determine the significance of the sources. And as you sit in groups, you're going to complete the task in the box. This section is going to be a quick recap on some of the events from last class. You're going to use a blank sheet of paper and you are going to create this chart, and then you're going to respond to the task as they appear on the slides. Names go here and the group's response for task 1 goes there. Last class we looked at the practice of lynching and we focused on Ida B. Wells, who was trying to secure some sort of legislation to end this practice. We also looked at Strange Fruit. We analyzed the lyrics. Here we have some more information regarding the practice of lynching, and we see that in 2018 the Senate of the United States did not classify lynching as a hate crime. They mentioned the Emmett Till murder as well as the long-term consequences of this particular practice. In the early 1900s, we see some of the horrific incidents that impacted the African American community. The highlighted items are terms you need to be familiar with. The Red Summer is looking at a series of tension for this particular time period. Keep in mind that this is also taking place during and at the end of World War I. There definitely is going to be some competition. As it mentions here, there's some competition with regard to jobs, which brings up the issue of economics and race. As we see the Tulsa Race Massacre and the burning of Black Wall Street in these images here, these horrific events are going to eventually lead to some of the contributing factors for African Americans to leave the South in a mass exodus to some of the cities in hopes of securing some sort of safety. The first task is to analyze If We Must Die by Claude McKay, which is a required source, and you want to complete this particular task on the blank sheet of paper that is going to be turned in. We're going to analyze 3 photographs from the Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921, and the task here on the blank sheet of paper is to answer these questions. Who should pay for such damage? Notice all of the devastation that's being inflicted here. And how can the rights and property be protected in the South? I'm giving you free rein to come up with any sort of solution to this particular issue. And if you're looking for a motive for this particular massacre, here it is. Here we have another required source. The questions here, even though we're not looking at any damage, who should pay for the damage? And then who can protect the property and life of the victims? The last photograph in the required framework is this image here, and we can see a lot of devastation. And again, the questions that we're trying to figure out here: who should pay for such damage? And then who is responsible for the protection of property and life when these incidents emerge? In particular here, the Tulsa Race Massacre. We're going to transition from the violence to W.E.B. Du Bois' work, where he outlines his concept of double consciousness. And going back to some of the horrific images, we want to think about this question: how many Americas exist? Here we have a white line representing white America and then a black line. In its incidents like Tulsa and the Dred Scott decision, that might contribute to this belief that there are 2 different Americas. Notice here we have the color line, and we're going to be looking at this particular concept of double consciousness to try to determine how many Americas exist. Background information: the source we're going to look at comes from W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a activist for black rights in the late 1800s going into the 1900s. And we also have Booker T. Washington. Now, the main difference between the two: Booker T. Washington was born as a slave, as we see the year here, and his approach was to accept what they're willing to give us, whereas Du Bois was more about black nationalism, black self-reliance, and was not going to wait for any sort of handout or any sort of change. He was advocating that African Americans need to take control of their lives and try to achieve whatever they could as far as success on their own. The reading that we're going to be looking at is of our spiritual strivings, and you want to be able to define double consciousness, connect the story to your life in any way, and then try to figure out what issues seem to be a constant for the African American experience. The next task comes from section 1 in the reading, and it is this section right here. And the question here is, how does he know he is different? You want to answer that question on the sheet of paper as you analyze this section here. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the terms being used here, for example, Mechanicsville, what's going on here in this scenario that Dubois is outlining, I want you to pretend that you are walking in a store, shopping, going about your day, and this represents your entrance, and you are using this particular pathway as you walk. And these little explosions are people interacting with you. So as you interact with a person right here, they say, I know an excellent colored man in my town. You get to the second box here, and then the person is saying, I fought at Mechanicsville. Now, if they're saying they fought at Mechanicsville, that's a Civil War battle. What are they saying with that particular comment? Are they saying that they are somehow, responsible for your freedom? And then here, or do not these Southern outrages make your blood boil? So you want to think about these particular comments and questions and figure out how that would possibly make the individual on the receiving end of the comments feel. Are they going to feel like they are part of the society or not a part of that society? And then task 4, we're going to take that same concept of double consciousness and see if we can apply it to other groups. Can other groups experience this double conscious that W.E.B. Du Bois is writing about in the early 1900s? You want to think about any of the comments that you may have heard or experienced in your personal life, and you want to share them and possibly even share how you felt. Did you feel included? Did you feel like you were being excluded, or maybe even felt isolated as a result of those particular comments or questions? Moving on with double consciousness, section 4A to 4C. Here he is outlining a little bit of that particular definition and how it could potentially play out. And you want to think back about that shopping experience. How does he know he's different? This is in section 2A in that reading. And in this scenario, he gives his card, a visiting card, to this girl. So here's W.E.B. Du Bois. Here's the card. And at that particular moment, the girl rejects it. What does he realize through that rejection? As he mentions, the exchange was merry till one girl, a tall newcomer, refused my card. How is that going to make this individual feel is the question. The outcome of being different in this section, Du Bois is looking at how people are going to respond. This is in sections 2B to 3A, and each person has their own breaking point. How much discrimination and prejudice can one potentially experience before they break? And one of the things he's saying here is he's giving a warning about anger, that somebody can fall into silent hatred of the pale world, mocking and distrusting everything white. And that could be a response to some of these particular actions. What I find fascinating about this is that King would write about something similar in 1963 in his letter from a Birmingham jail, when he's looking at segregation and arguing that some individuals have already adjusted to segregation. Some are insensitive. What would that mean? Well, let's just say you have a black restaurant. Your business kind of depends on segregation. But then that other group that develops that anger, that bitterness, King's writing about something very similar to what Du Bois is writing about. At the end of the reading, around lines 20A through D, talks about some of the solutions about obtaining freedom. And what he's looking at here are the methods already that are in existence to obtain freedom or to change the circumstance. The first thing Africans needed physical freedom. They did achieve that. However, then they were subjected to segregation, and they're still dealing with violence in the early 1900s. What about political power? Well, they tried that during Reconstruction. How did that last or end up? What about the training of brains and the training of hands? What about education? Well, if you are going to get an education, or if you do have your skills with your hands, do you own anything? What's going to happen if every time you go for a job and you have the skills or the mind to do so, the person making a decision about whether or not you're going to get that particular position is white? Because in the early 1900s, there's limited opportunity, if any, for you to be able to transfer wealth. Keep in mind, in 1865, slavery is over. If the year is 1865 and we're talking about 1920, we're not talking about that long ago in comparison to generations. We're talking about one generation. For the most part, you could still have people who are alive who are actually slaves. And at that point, you wouldn't be able to own any land or any property or anything. You're still going to kind of be indirectly controlled by the group already in power. Malcolm X in 1964, who advocated for complete separation, kind of picked up on that concept as well, where he is comparing Chinatown and advocating for some sort of separate black nation. And he's recognizing that regardless if you integrate, you still don't control the banks, you don't control the politics, there's nothing that you own, everything is controlled by outsiders. As we move towards the end, you want to make sure you have the definition for double consciousness. Hopefully you shared your story, and then what issues seem to be a constant. The last task you're going to do is read We Wear the Mask, and then compare it to the work of Du Bois that we have read for today's class. At the end, you want to be able to have an understanding of these particular terms. And then you want to check your sources, verify your definitions, and that's it.